Hello everyone, welcome to today's HKICBA module preparation seminar for Module 13. My name is Jackie. I'm a lecturer from HKCA. I mainly teach Module 13 and capstone examination. And in today's seminar, we are going to cover two specific topics. The first one is about whether sufficient audit evidence has been obtained during the audit. And then the second topic, we will move on to recommend an appropriate audit opinion based on the information from the question and the case in the examination. And before we move directly into the topic, I want to talk about the importance of audit stages in this examination. No matter which topic you will encounter in the examination, for each part of each question, you will have to be able to identify the appropriate audit stages you are in. For example, if a question is trying to ask you whether you have sufficient appropriate audit evidence, the question will not directly ask you yes or no. You are not going to give a yes or no answer on whether sufficient audit evidence has been obtained. You will be required to propose appropriate audit procedures in order for you to demonstrate whether you understand how to obtain sufficient audit evidence in the examination. Therefore, the ability to propose appropriate audit procedures in response to the case facts and the risk of material misstatement identified in the question and in the case is how you're going to score marks to pass this examination. So first of all, you need to understand whether you are in the planning stage, which you are identifying and evaluating the risk of material misstatement. And then if you are in stage 2B, which is the audit execution stage, you will be proposing appropriate audit procedures. Do not mix the two stages up. If you mix it up, you will be answering in a wrong direction, giving a wrong answer, which will waste your time because your answer will not score you anything. You are just wasting your time to write a lot of things that is in the wrong stages of the audit, which will cost you your examination. And for the part on appropriate audit opinion, you see the topic name. It is based on the audit evidence collected for you to propose an appropriate audit opinion. But most of the time in the examination, if a question is asking on audit opinion, you will first have to identify whether there are misstatements or not in the question, and whether the misstatements are material or not, for you to be able to determine the appropriate audit opinion. So, first of all, you need to understand how the questions are being structured in this examination, and then how are you going to identify the appropriate topics and the appropriate audit stages you need to focus on for each question. Then you start to plan your answer and then score the appropriate mark to pass the examination. So this is a very important thing I want you to first remember before we drill into the specific topics. All right. So today I have extracted 3 chapters from my notes. I will be focusing on ROMM and assertion level first, because most of the questions regarding risk of material misstatement are from this section. Sometimes the question will ask you to identify and evaluate the RMM, which is in the audit planning stage, and I referred it as stage 2A in my notes. And then today's focus obviously will be on stage 2B. We will be talking about how to respond to risk of material misstatement, as well as different case facts and management response in the question for you to propose appropriate audit procedures that can score you marks. And then finally, we will be moving on to have a quick recap on materiality and the evaluation of misstatement. Then I will move on to tells you the relationship of everything here related to the audit opinion. When are we going to give a clean opinion, or when are we going to give a modified or qualified opinion in different circumstances? Of course, everything I'm going to talk about today needs to be based on the case facts and information you read about during the examination. So very importantly, in the examination, you need to understand the case facts and identify which stages you are in for you to get the appropriate or for you to plan the appropriate answer to get the required mark to pass the examination. Okay, so let's move on into RMM and assertion level first. Alright, moving on to our risk of material misstatement at a certain level. And in this chapter, you will have to read about it for both stages. The first one is regarding the audit planning stage, which is talking about audit risk and how to identify and evaluate risk of material misstatement, which I'm not going into details today. But I have to cover the part of which is very important before we move on to talking about the audit execution stage and the audit procedures, which is the assertions. We are at our assertion level, therefore the assertions of different financial statement caption is especially important during examination. You will have to design your audit procedures according to the assertions and the financial statement caption in the question. If you fail to identify the relevant assertion, your answer will likely go into the wrong direction. So let's have a quick recap of some of the assertions here. First thing, I need to remind you that you must be able to tell the difference between each assertion. Of course, in the examination, the question will not ask you what is the definition or what is the difference between different assertions. You will not see a question like that, but you will need to be able to tell the difference, especially when you read the case facts. And from the case facts, it describes to you what has happened. It's likely an issue or a disaster or an event that occurred during the financial year, and then ask you what is your response as a auditor. And sometimes the question is on audit planning stage, it will ask you to evaluate and assess the risk of material misstatement. If the question is in stage 2B, then you will have to propose the appropriate audit procedures according to the assessed RMM. Therefore, you will need to be able to understand which assertion should be in place in different circumstances. Especially, you need to understand the difference between an account balances and a class of transaction. Basically, class of transaction is talking about a revenue-related or P&L related account captions or in transactions. For account balances, most likely we're talking about some kind of assets or liability related items. You need to distinguish between the difference for these two because some of the assertions do not apply to the other one. For example, existence. For existence, we're talking about assets and liabilities most of the time. And you cannot say I'm worried about the existence of a class of transaction. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, and the existence of an asset, it makes sense. Existence of a transaction in English, even, it doesn't make sense. But if you want to talk about whether a transaction is real or not, we use the word occurrence, whether it has or has not occurred during the year. Therefore, the transaction is real or not. We use the word occurrence instead of existence of a transaction. So you need to be careful in the exam. If you use a wrong description, technically you are in the wrong direction, and your answer probably will not score you anything. And but I know sometimes it is a little bit confusing, especially when the question or the case fact is mixing up few different things together. And sometimes the assertion and the financial statement caption, they are related. For example, we talk about whether a revenue transaction is real or not, whether that particular revenue transaction has or has not occurred. If a revenue transaction is fake, it didn't occur, then it will affect the existence of the relevant financial statement caption, which is the accounts receivable. So if a transaction or a revenue transaction is fake, the related accounts receivable of that revenue transaction does not exist. You need to be able to use the specific word. Is a transaction or event that did not occur will lead to the relevant or related accounts receivable do not exist. This is how you describe it or identify it in the examination. And sometimes because the case facts are mixing together and the question have different parts, and the different parts may be asking you a different assertion or different financial statement caption, especially in section A. Maybe part A of the question wants you to talk about the occurrence of the revenue, but part B of the question wants you to answer related to existence of the accounts receivable. Then if you mix it up and you put the wrong answer into the wrong part of the question, then you're just again wasting your time and do not score anything. And at some other transaction, also you need to be very careful. For example, when we talk about valuation, we are talking about the valuation of an asset most of the time. Intangible asset or tangible asset. We're talking about the valuation. How much does it worth? But when we talk about the amount of a certain class of transaction, for example, a transaction, a revenue transaction that happened, what is the amount? We use the word accuracy. It's like, did you calculate the revenue correctly? So we use the word, we are worried about the accuracy of the revenue. We do not use the word, we are worried about the valuation of the revenue, as doesn't make sense. So it's wrong. So you need to be very careful. Accuracy, it can cover both asset and class of transaction and accounts balances. But valuation, we are talking about asset most of the time. Allocation, most likely the question will be about liabilities, especially current liabilities versus non-current liabilities. Especially when the question is talking about a breach of bank confidence or talking about a long-term bank loan, how to allocate it, whether it is being allocate correctly between current and non-current liability, and sometimes it related to the obligation, whether there's a breach of covenant, have the obligation to pay now, something like that. You need to be careful, and it related to how you interpret the case fact correctly, and then how you're going to pick the most relevant assertion to each question. All right, so make sure you understand the assertion, and I don't have time today to go into details into explaining each assertion with you, but of course when we talk about question and answer later, we will cover the assertion a little bit. But first of all, make sure you understand the difference and you'll be able to apply it when you read the case fact. But be able to tell the definition of each assertion is not enough. Okay, I don't need your definition. I need you to be able to, after you read the case fact and read the question, you need to be able to identify which assertion your examiner is looking for. This is how you read the question and answer, how you practice the past paper, making sure you understand what you are doing. Okay, so moving on to the audit execution stage. In this part, you can see from the name of the auditing standard, it's called Auditor's Response to Assessed Risk. It is on the title. Okay, it is in the title. You will be doing the audit execution stage after you have assessed the risk of material misstatement. And you should have identified the relevant assertions and the relevant financial statement caption already before you move on to this execution stage. So if the question is asking you for audit procedure, you need to be able to know what you are talking about first. And then we will move on talking about the nature, extent, and timing. You see this word in the definition here. It's talking about HASA 330. The definition basically is talking about we need to design audit procedures, and we need to care about the nature, extent, and timing. But really, in the examination, you see this word, you may use this word in your answer, but only if the question is asking about the definition. Most of the time, you will not be using these three words, but you need to apply this in your answer. First of all, nature. Nature mostly is talking about audit approach. What is the audit? If the question asks you the nature, this is asking you the audit approach, and audit approach, pick one. Is either combined approach or the substantive approach. Most of the time is combined approach because there will be certain kind of control procedures or internal control process at your client. Most of the time you use combined approach. But of course it depends on the question and the case facts. it makes you, or it limits your ability to design the appropriate audit procedures. For example, if the first part of the question, for example, part A, asks you the audit approach, and from the case facts you know that the internal control is not operating effectively, or there are times in the question or in the case fact describing that there are no internal control for you, then obviously you will be proposing a substantive approach in part A of the question. Then part B probably will ask you for the appropriate audit procedures. In this case, you cannot propose a test of control procedures. Agree? If you pick a substantive approach, you should be proposing a substantive procedures only. If you give test of control, then you are wrong and you will not score any mark. Then therefore you need to be able to tell the examiner you know what you're doing. So don't give a approach and then give a wrong procedures. This is how you are not getting the appropriate audit evidence, because you go here substantive approach but you go do test of control, then it means it is not an appropriate audit procedures. And for extent, most of the time the question is about extent. But how are you going to describe the extent of your audit procedures in examination? Because in real life you can know, like, just do it. Okay, I do more, I dig deeper, I check more. Then you are having a deeper extent or larger extent when you perform audit procedure. But how in the examination you can demonstrate this to your examiner? It is by description of the audit procedures in detail. You tell the examiner what you are going to check when you perform an audit procedure. For example, you do not just say, I will check the contract, I will check the agreement, full stop. No, you need to say specifically what are you going to check in the contract. For example, I'm going to check the amount, whether it is being recorded correctly in the ledger. The amount in the contract are being correctly recorded in the ledger. Or I'm going to check the date of the contract or the duration of the contract period to determine whether the cut-off is correct, whether the amount is being recorded in the correct period. Or sometimes there are certain terms and conditions in the contract to determine the accuracy of the calculation of the amounts. This is how you're going to describe the audit procedures appropriately. This is what we call appropriate audit evidence. If you perform the audit procedures inappropriately, you will not get appropriate audit evidence. And finally, timing. Sometimes you need to mention the time, especially when a question is talking about subsequent events or something about before or after the end date, especially when you're talking about the cut-off assertion, then the timing is important. When are you going to perform procedures, or what is the exact timing or date you can perform a certain procedure? Sometimes when you, for example, you are doing a subsequent settlement check, the date and timing is important. You have to check information or check the bank statement after the year-end date. If you say you are going to check bank statement near the year end, it is not an appropriate audit procedures. Therefore, not appropriate audit evidence. You need to say, I have to inspect the bank statement that is after the year end date to check whether the subsequent settlement, there is subsequent settlement of a certain amount or a certain liability or something like that. You need to be able to describe everything in detail. The description of the audit procedures is especially important. And most of the time in a panoramic report, your examiner is saying that the audit procedures you guys propose are too general, means it's not specific enough. So nature, extent, and timing, you need to have this in your head. So when you write out the audit procedures, you need to fulfill the specific requirement and according to what happened in the case and what the question is looking for. All right, moving on. So how are we going to or what are the bullets we have regarding audit procedures? You see, I grouped them into A, E, I, O, U, C, R. Here is all the audit procedures you can describe in the examination, but you need to be careful. That's why I keep on talking about the assertion. If you identify the wrong assertion, most likely your audit procedures will be in wrong direction. Then, second point here, sometimes some analytical procedures cannot address some assertion. For example, analytical procedures, good for valuation, good for accuracy because we are checking whether something is reasonable or not by comparing it with some relevant data. Then, but it cannot address existence. Everything is reasonable doesn't mean it exists, especially when, for example, we talk about an asset. Okay, for an asset, for existence, you need to go inspect it to check the existence of an asset. Or, for example, inventory count. You go to you go to attend the inventory counts, so you can perform certain procedures to check whether the inventory exists. But in your description, you can say further if you want to cover further or more assertion. For inventory, if you go check the condition as well, instead of just counting the existence, you check the condition of the inventory, it will give you information on the valuation assertion. Because if the condition is not good, then the valuation should be lower, especially when the question is about the lower of cost and NRV of an inventory item. This is in your description. The procedures is inspection. You go check something, but you need to be able to describe it appropriately, make the procedures cover different assertions, sometimes more than one assertion, just by saying you do a little bit more. Alright? And sometimes, for example, observation. Observation mostly is for test of control. You observe the client whether they perform a certain internal control process appropriately, whether certain internal control procedures are being executed by the employee of the company. So you go to observe whether that happened or not. Most of the time it is related to test of control. Once you pick the correct description of the audit procedures and link it to the appropriate assertion and financial statement caption, you completed your sentences and you got every component of a appropriate audit procedures which provide you with sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. That's how you're going to score marks in the examination. So beware of the assertion, the financial statement caption, and then pick an appropriate audit procedures by describing the audit procedures appropriately. That's all the requirement you need. All right. And moving on. See, I introduced the ROMM triangle in my notes, which is the three things that you must be able to identify when a question is related to ROMM and assertion level, no matter stage 2A or stage 2B. When you are identifying and assessing the RMM, obviously you need to identify all three parts of the RMM triangle. But for execution stage, you still need to know that, as I just told you, if you identify wrong assertion and wrong financial statement caption, your audit procedures will likely be wrong. And this part I will say less important because in examination it's like 90% of the time it is a high risk of material misstatement. That's because some disaster or some bad things happen in the exam in the case, which leads you to do something, to do some audit procedures or need to risk of material misstatement of certain financial statement captions. Around 10 to 20% of the time, there will be a low, not even 20, probably only 10% of the time, or even 5% of the time, you will go with a low risk of material misstatement in the exam. And you can see, I skipped the part on moderate. If you read your notes or you go to the auditing center, you will find that the assessment is high, moderate, and low. But in my notes, most of the time I take out the part on moderate because I want you to either go high or go low in the examination because it is easier for you to score mark. If you pick a moderate risk of material misstatement, it is harder for you to describe in your answer. No matter in stage 2A and stage 2B, it will be harder for you. And since most of the time it is a high risk of material misstatement, so you can't be off course too much and when you pick a high or low RMM in examination, go high most of the time, right? But of course, it depends on the case fact. We will talk more about this when we cover past paper question and answer, all right? And I will skip the part on audit planning stage. You can read it yourself, but we're focusing on the audit execution stage. And this part already like talk about assertion of financial statement caption like 200 times, and you need to read the question carefully. You lose mark because you did not read the question, or you do not know a certain terms or certain description of the event in the case facts, meaning should be focused on certain assertion of certain financial statement caption. That's what you need to do when you read the past paper. You need to link the case fact with the suggested solution together, because something being mentioned in the case means some assertion and some financial statement caption is having a problem. You need to be able to link that. And then next part, to determine the appropriate audit procedures, and what you need to do is to again read the question carefully, because most of the time the question probably asking you for a specific procedures under the circumstances. Sometimes the question generally just asks you to propose audit procedures, then it is easier. You can propose whatever audit procedures you think it is appropriate in the circumstances. But sometimes the question actually asks you for very specific things. For example, I just want substantive procedures. Please propose substantive procedures. Then if you give test of control, you're wrong. Wrong direction, waste of time and ink. If the question is asking you internal control process, the question is asking you to suggestion of test of control. If you give substantive procedures, you say analytical procedures, you see recalculation, you say send confirmation, then it is wrong. All right? Read the question carefully. What are the specific procedures being asked for? And sometimes the question describe a situation or something bad, or your management, your client say something in the question. Those are the hints for you to ask the right question. In the procedure, remember AEIOUCR, or E is about inquiry. You need to know what should you ask the question, or what are the action you're going to take in response to the things that are being described in the question. What the management say, what the management do, what the company do, what has happened, and then what is your action, what information you need to get, what question you need to ask, what documents you need to request. Okay, what should you do under the circumstances in the case fact? This is how you plan your answer. Think about it first. What has happened? What information you actually need to tackle the related assertion and financial statement caption. Remember, your response is aimed to resolve something that happened in the case. See, when I highlight things in green, it means it related to case facts. What are the case facts telling you? There's some problem, or there's a cut-off problem with the invoices. There's a cut-off problem with with the invoice. Then what you need to do? So your procedures will need to be related to timing. I need to check the invoices before the year end date, before and close to the year end date, and after also close to the year end date, but after the year end. Then this is how you're going to resolve the problem. If the problem is related to cut off. If the problem is related to valuation, in my example just now regarding inventory, then your procedure is to check the condition of the inventory, or check whether there are subsequent sales of the inventory after the year end. This is how you're going to solve the problem. What is the problem at the time, and what you need to achieve more of the time is to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, and you do it by performing the appropriate audit procedures. Remember, this is your only aim in the examination. And the last point I want to remind you, you need to tailor-make your procedures most of the time. If you be able to do that, you are more likely to score more marks, because different issues, different situations, different disaster in the examination, sometimes they are so similar. When you read a past paper, and in the examination you got a new question and you think it is related to a past paper you have studied before, they are so similar, the facts are so similar, and then you decide to copy the answer of a previous past paper. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is really wrong because similar facts, this time I can asking you an assertion and financial statement caption in a past paper. But with the same facts, I changed the question a little bit. I just changed the name of the assertion or to change the financial statement caption with the same fact. The answer is completely different. You need to again read and understand the case facts and the question carefully and pick the appropriate audit procedures and describe it according to the case fact in that particular year. Because things that looks similar doesn't mean they are the same. Especially if you read enough past paper, you will know that this is what you need to do when you analyze the past paper. Why the two questions is so similar, the case fact is so similar, but the suggested solution are so different. Why past paper A have this audit procedure, but past paper B do not have the same audit procedure? Why? You need to identify them and understand it. All right. And here I already give you some suggestion here of a common question structure. And if you see this question structure, the question most likely is about audit execution stage, and you will have to propose the relevant audit procedures. And of course, for our MM at the assertion level, the question may move on to the audit completion stage, and most likely it is also the second part of today's seminar. It is sometimes the question asking you the type of audit opinions or what is the impact on the auditor's report. I will be talking about this more later in this stage, but here for in this part, you can see I want you to never jump to a conclusion too quickly, especially when you come to audit completion stage. Whatever you assess the risk of material misstatement or the audit procedures you do in stage 2A and stage 2B, when you jump into stage 3, you need to slow down yourself before you jump into conclusion of giving a qualified opinion. I know you guys want to give qualified opinion. You want it a lot. But in the examination, it is not the opinion that matters. It is the process that leads from stage 2A, stage 2B into your conclusion of the audit opinion that matters. You need to describe the process. Therefore, the second topic today is to whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained in order for you to propose or recommend an appropriate audit opinion. We are talking about the process. Okay, so we will cover a little more in the second part of today's seminar and regarding the audit opinion. Now, for this part, I will end here, and we will move on to talk about a question about audit execution stage first, and then I will go back to talk about materiality and misstatements, and then audit opinion. All right. Okay, we will now move on to look at a question, which is December 2024 exam. And first question is question 3. This is part of the case question. And I don't have enough time to go over the case with you, but you need to remember for all questions in section A, you need to look at all the information, and any information throughout the case which is usable, you can use it in your answer. And let's look at the question first. Always look at the question first before you go into look at the case facts and details. For this question, it already gives you a reminder at first that you need to base on the background information of the case. It gives you a hint here. And then it asks you, actually, they are asking you two things here. You have to identify the requirement first. The first one is to analyze the reasonableness of the client's response. So you see they have put this inside the question. So the response of the CFOs is a key in this question. So anything he or she said that is doesn't make sense or having problem, you will be need You will need to be able to identify that problem. And the question gives you one more hint here, and it wants you to apply professional skepticism. So it wants you to look for the issues here. So the first part is that you need to analyze whether something the client said is reasonable or not, and you need to apply professional skepticism. And I can tell you, most of the time in this examination, when clients said something or do something, most of the time it is not reasonable, or sometimes it is even wrong. Wrong accounting treatment, wrong response, and wrong disclosure. It can be anything, but you need to be skeptical. The question probably will not you will not come across with a question ask you what is professional skepticism, but you need to demonstrate it by applying it in your answer, how you analyze the situation, and you can show the examiner your professional skepticism. So this part here, you can identify this as actually a stage 2A question. Although you see in this whole question, it did not mention anything about ROMM. But you see there is a problem that is happening, and it asks you to analyze. It means you are finding whether there is something wrong in here. It gives you a hint here, although it didn't use ROMM. So the first part here is actually an audit planning question. You need to identify and evaluate the risk of material misstatement secretly without explicitly asking the question, but you are doing that. And obviously for second part, more straightforward. Design audit procedures to audit each of the above specific, and it gives you one very important information in the question itself here is account balances. So this question is about account balances. So you will be focusing on the items in the balance sheet, or now we call statement of financial position, the items which is account balances in this case. If you didn't pay attention to the question, or this is the first time of your examination, you may be focusing on the audit procedures and miss out this part. And as in the panelist report, most of you should have been focusing on giving the audit procedures and fail to analyze what is the actual problem and what is the matter in the response of the CFO here. So the second part here is to give audit procedure. Yes, stage 2B, giving audit procedures, obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence through the procedures. But you need to know what are the problem first for you to be able to give the appropriate audit procedure. So let's move on to the case fact. And see, I highlight this again. It tells you account balances again. You see account balances 1 and account balances 2 times. Whenever you saw something 2 or 3 times in a question, please pay attention. It wants you to focus on that. Why? Because part A is straightforward. It gives you a hint in part A. It's talking about provision. You put in the word provision. So it makes sense. This is an account balances. Provision. Account balances. Makes sense. But for part B and part C, you see this is a little bit a trap here. Management bonuses, it can be a account balances and it can be an expenses. If you are focusing on the expenses side, so whether we are how much we are paying the accuracy, then it is wrong, because we are talking about the account balances, whether or not we should make the provision of this management bonus. This is the hints that gives you. We are talking about account balances. We are not talking about whether the payment or whatever, whether you check whether they have been paid or something. You are not going to focus on that. You are focusing on the provision from the hints of the question. You know this is talking about provision. And here, see, it said other expenses. But it actually, if you think about account balances, this expenses is coming from the write-off of the renovation cost regarding certain kiosks. So the question is talking about the write-off of a PPE. Again, write-off of a PPE. Although this question didn't ask you to identify the risk of material misstatement, technically you don't need to name the assertions, you don't need to name the financial statement caption, because it didn't use the word ROMM, but technically, within it, you still need to know what the question is asking you. This is a very important part. If you fail to identify what is requirement of the question, you will fail to give a correct answer. And therefore, once we know what we're doing, the provision now is focusing on whether they should or should not make the provision. Agree? Because you will have to have enough evidence or enough ground for the client to make the provision. And you don't need to actually mention the accounting standard regarding provision requirement. Don't do it in this examination. It is a Module 13 examination. Don't spend too much time in, or you can actually spend no time in mentioning the accounting requirements. You just need to know what is the basic requirement of making a provision, then that's it. Your audit procedure should then focusing on that. And actually, the question gives you a lot of hints. This is talking about a sales return, and it says there are no members subsequently claim any sales return. Something given in the question. So if no one is making sales returns, therefore there is no basis to make the provision, right? But again, this is something being given in the question as a case fact. You should use it to determine your audit procedure. So your first thing for something happens in the questions, in the case facts, your audit procedure should be go check whether this is actually true or not. This already gives you hints on some of the audit procedure. So 4 marks here. So technically, if you be able to identify there are 2 requirements in each part of the question, so 2 marks for the analysis and 2 marks for audit procedures, 1 mark for each audit procedure. So you should at least give 2 audit procedures here, and you should analyze the case facts here to say what is important. The important part is whether we have sufficient ground or sufficient accounting ground to make this provision or not. If yes, then no problem, but you have to perform procedures to check it. This is the focus of this part. And for the management bonus, similarly, the question gives you some ground or some problem that you should be aware. For example, it said it is loss making. Why they will pay a discretionary bonus when it's loss making, and the ground for making the provision for the bonus also discretionary. It is discretionary. So is there any evidence to prove that they are actually going to pay this bonuses? You need to perform procedures to find that, right? And then finally, at the last sentence, it gives you one more hint. It said not contractually obligated to reward. So again, does this sentence suggested that there are not enough ground to make the provision too? Is it not highly probable to pay this discretionary bonus? If it is not probable to pay, then the provisions probably should not be made. And if they make it, it is an overstatement of the provision. You need to identify what is the problem. No matter it is from someone that tells you something in the case, or just generally a description from the case fact, you should be able to identify the problem here, whether or not we should make the provision. For part A and part B, both are arguing about the provision. And going to part C, other expenses, again a trap. I already said it should be related to PPE. Therefore, the focus of the audit procedure is whether or not we should write off the kiosk, whether there's ground for the company to write off the kiosk. Is it really happening, or just that we don't have enough evidence? What kind of evidence you are looking for? You know that you need to look for sufficient audit evidence, right? But what kind of audit evidence is appropriate and sufficient? This is what you need to put inside your answer. You are not focusing on the expense part, but to focusing on the validity of the write-off of the renovation cost regarding the kiosk. Of course, you need to look at whether the renovation cost, first of all, is being recorded correctly originally. If this is not, then probably the write-off of the cost is wrong again. And also, you need to take into consideration of the background information of the case. It gives you a hint here. This company, Zhang, is a newly established company. They newly opened some kiosks, and then they want to shut it down in the first year, in the first financial statement. Then probably that is something that doesn't make sense here. You need to apply your professional skepticism. So think about it. If before you listen to my lecture, before you come to seminar today, if you are the one reading the question by yourself, are you able to identify what I just told you? Will you be stucking on talking about the expenses here instead of the account balance? But the question tells you twice. It is talking about account balances. Don't fall into this trap. Most of you got the answer wrong or go into a wrong direction is because you didn't read the question carefully, or you don't know what account balances mean when in this question, and then why it is being mentioned twice in the question, and why it certainly tells you that it is not contractually obligated, why there's such a sentence in it, why it tells you no members subsequently claimed any sales return. Why? When you study past paper, you need to understand, right? Just now, I already taught you about the knowledge, what you need to do, nature, extent, and timing of the audit procedure. But now, when you go into a question, you need to understand how the question is being structured, why certain case facts are there, and then we will move on to talk about the answer. Okay, so move on to the answer for question number 3 in here. First of all, you see, question 3a, you see there's certain case facts being mentioned. You need to put the case facts in your answer. For example, the provision, it is representing 3% of gross sales, but no member claim. This is the case facts you use. And then you need to analyze and do your own analysis. For example, the red one is what you required to put in your answer. The green things is just something provided in the case, is case facts. Red things are the things you need to be able to put in your answer. For example, you need to say the 3% gross sales does not form any basis. Doesn't make sense. There's no ground for making such provision. And therefore, if such provision was being made based on there's no returns, the provision at the end was actually overstated. You need to identify the issue. Always, when it is a stage 2A question, the first part here, you need to tell the examiner what was wrong. What are the issue or issues in this question? Something is wrong. That's wrong is a risk of material misstatement. Something is probably misstated. And in this case, the provision, account balances, the provision was overstated. Then you move on to give the audit procedures. The audit procedures are easy. First part, for example, inquire or challenge the management. So inquiry is AERUCR, inquiry, ask question. Ask question. First of all, the appropriateness. Why? Ask the client why this is 3%. You know there's something wrong here. 3% does not form any basis. If you can identify it, then your audit procedures is tailor-made to this problem. It does not form any basis. So you ask the client, why is it 3%? How do you get these figures? 3%. How is it appropriate from the client perspective? So inquire or challenge them. And then you check. Again, the question provided this to you. It says no return of goods. Then your audit procedure obviously is to verify whether this is true or not. So the procedure is to inspect subsequent payment or inspect subsequent returns document, whatever documents, or you can just say inspect documents or ask client to obtain further information to identify whether there are or are not any return of goods being recorded. You verify this is true or not. If this is true, then the provision should not be made, because subsequent happening will affect whether a provision is provide evidence of whether a provision should or should not be made. What happens subsequent to the year end? You should know that. Then your audit procedure should be tailor-made and focusing on that, right? And then let's move on to question 3b. Again, using the facts, loss making, and this one, related parties, is from the case. From the case upward, it's not within the question itself, but the information are from the case. So you can use it and mention they are related parties. There's a professional skepticism needs you to think there may be an undue influence of the distribution of bonuses here. You can use it. Even if you fail to identify the second part, the first part is good enough. The fact that Zhang was loss-making, unless it is bound by the contract, they should not make the provision, right? Because it is not contractual. It is not obligated. It was given in the question. You should be able to identify that. And then, now is your audit procedure. Again, Always the first procedures regarding an issue, a problem, a disaster, you are going to obtain more information, ask question. How do you get the discretionary bonus? How do you calculate it? What is the basis? And here you see who is entitled to that. You need to understand the basis of it, who and how. And then finally, whether this is contractual or not, or whether this is probable or not, you need to look for whether there's approval. See? Basing on the case facts, you design the specific audit procedures. Okay, is there any approval? If there's approval, and then this probably is true, is there any communication being sent to the staff or the management that there will be a bonus paid to them to prove whether the provision should or should not be made, right? And here, I didn't highlight element because the second part here, if you've been able to identify this from the original case facts, then you can design the procedures to cover this. For example, here it's like whether any of this management personnel approved of the bonus, whether they involved in it or not. Of course, if you fail to identify the second part, you will not be able to give the second part of this audit procedures. But this is a 4-mark question. Only the first part probably give you enough. If you can do it properly, you will probably got 2 or 3 marks already for this 4 marks question, which is more than half for you to pass the examination. It is already good enough. In the real examination, you don't need to write so many things. Just the keywords and the key terms that you covered and present it into a nicely structured sentences or small paragraph. That is more than enough for you to pass the examination. For 4 marks, it is a way too long an answer. Okay, you don't have to do anything, just part of it. If you know what you are doing, you do that small part, you score the marks, you pass the examination. And finally, part 3C here, you see everything here, the procedures, everything is talking about the unreasonableness to close the kiosk or not. You see, right out of asset on the fixed asset register. See, it is talking about the assets right off. Whole focus of the answer here. If you don't understand the question, you read the answer. When you read the answer, you analyze why the question is like that, and you go back to the question. You will understand why I said what I said. Why I say the question mentioned account balances twice, because this question wants you to focusing on the PPE part, focusing on your procedure to the fixed asset register. Whether it is reasonable to close the kiosk, reasonable to make such a provision for the write-off of the renovation cost. All right, you will check the contracts or agreement to ensure they are closed. We check minutes to understand the reason why this kiosk was closed. See, none of the audit procedures here is like generally or just generally copy from another question. They are all being tailor-made in according to the specific facts being mentioned in the question or in the case. You have to be able to learn to do that, because the audit procedure itself is not difficult. Checking approval, review minutes, check the contract. These are all audit procedures that you will see like a million times when you review all the past paper in your studying process. But eventually, how to describe the audit procedures properly and in response to the assessed risk or the actual case facts in the question is how you're going to score your marks. All right, so this is question 3. Please read it yourself in more details and use the technique I tell you to analyze the question and the answer. Don't just read the question and the answer. You will never learn that, right? All right. All right, we are moving on to another question in the same paper, which is question 4, and basing on the same company and same case background for which is a section A question. And let's go on to looking at the question first. This question a little bit different, and it is talking about preparing a memo to your boss, the audit partner. And I'm not going into details regarding the memo format in today's session, but just remind you of it worth a lot of marks. It range from 2 to 4 marks for just adopting to the memo format. And also analyzing the marks helps you to determine how much you need to answer. So let's just simply assume only 2 marks for communication and analytical skills in this question. So total there should be around 10 marks being allocated to the order procedures that are being requested in this question. So you see they already tells you have 2 different problem or issue in this question related to some kind of manual entries. When we just read this question here, we know something related to manual entry. So you see I already highlight the word manual, which is quite important. It is not something automatically done by the system, but the accounting department need to manually post these entries. And this question is focusing on this. So, and the question obviously is asking for audit procedure. So, if 10 marks, I'll allocate like 5 audit procedures to the first problem, and then another 5 procedures to the second problem here. So, let's quickly take a look of the case facts here. You see it keep mentioning about manual journal entries. So you know the focus on this whole question is about manual journal entries. So you need to know the specific problem or specific risk in relation to manual entries. We are afraid that some people or your client post this manual entry trying to manipulate something, or these entries are not being properly calculated or approved during the process, so that may create some kind of risk of material mistake. But therefore we will have to design certain audit procedures to focus on these manual journal entries. So it's not a very common topic, but since it appears in this examination, hopefully it will not come in the next exam, or at least not coming too soon, hopefully. But anyway, if you see something called something being manual done by the client, the risk of material misstatement most of the time will be higher already. And because it is a high risk, you will have to design certain procedures to deal with the problem. And now in this question, quite interestingly, the first set of manual entries is an established process. I don't know whether you can identify that, but you will need to. In a question, when the client explain to you, or in the case facts, it is being given here that something are being done regularly. Although this is a manual entry because it requires some manual calculation regarding the consignment sale, but it is an established process. When something is a process or a certain procedures that are being done regularly by your client, automatically you will have to question about the correctness or the mistakes of it, or whether there's any mistakes, because this is manually and are being done regularly. So will they be missed 1 or 2? Because they do it monthly, so 12 times a year. It makes sense, right? But if there's 13 times or 14 times, then it doesn't make sense. But in this case, you should be expecting 12 manual entries regarding the monthly consignment sales. And this is an established process. So you see, and this question is asking for audit procedure. So you see, I already marked down test of control. There's a certain established process. You will need to understand the whole process and to make sure everything are being done correctly. And why it is important too in this question, because technically this is a new company. This is a new operation. So as an auditor, we will have to understand the internal control and the process within our client's business. And therefore, you can expect yourself to be focusing on test of control. At least for 5 audit procedures you mentioned, at least 1 or 2 of them should be related to test of control, especially for the first part, because it is an established process. We more concerned on the correctness and any mistakes being made during the whole 12 times that are being posted during the year. But for the second part here, it mentions something about the other manual entries. It only say 50 other journal entries, and they are being credited to the revenue. The information being provided in the case is so little here. We have no information about that. But your examiner is, I will say, quite good, and it gives you a hint here. It said something about opportunities for the management to overstate the revenue. It technically already told you what is the issue here. It's a possible overstatement of the revenue. Your examiner already helped you identify the problem in the financial statement caption, which is overstate of revenue. But still, for this question, again, we are pinpointed and looking for audit procedures here. And for second part, we are not just concerned about the correctness or any mistakes, or probably this is not what we first, well, our first concern regarding this 50 journal entries. The first thing we should be worried about should be, what are they? What are these journal entries? Are you asking this question? When you see this case facts, you should be asking this question. What are these entries? As an auditor, you come across with some strange journal entries and 50 of them, and some of them are significant. Your first question should always be, what are the details of this journal entries? What are you going to ask the client for? The audit procedures, remember we talk about this. What should we do when we encounter a certain situation? We need to obtain more information first regarding what are these entries. So you should be obtaining the details for it and ask questions on them. What are the nature? What are the process of approving these journal entries? And this question here, it provides you a very detailed entry, debit credit and debit credit regarding the 12 manual entries. But for this, why it didn't provide more information to us regarding the debit side of this entry? So you should be asking, credit to revenue, but debit to what? Agree? What are the debit credit? It gives you a hint here. You talk about the entries and it only talk about credit. So the next question you should be asking, what is the debit? This is the question you should be asking your client for more details and at least understand what is the debit side of these entries. It already provides you with 2 or 3 questions to ask your client already. Therefore, don't worry, we are only looking for 5 audit procedures for each issue here. For asking these 2 questions, okay, you probably got already like 2 procedures, maybe even 3. For test of control also is the same. And for manual journal entries, one very important thing you should be asking is that whenever there are manual journal entries, you need to focus on the approval. Okay, whether manual entries are being approved, because if it is an automated entries by the system, probably the process is being established that there should be a certain control, application control or other thing in place, but you will still need to worry about the approval of the entries. And for all entries, you need to be worried about the approval. And especially for manual entries and especially for unknown manual journal entries, you should be worried about the approval. So again, if you talk about approval for both, you probably get like 2 procedures already. And for talking about test of control, you must be talking about approval as well. If you test the control or test and establish the process, you should be asking for approval. The keywords approval should be appear in your answer, in your audit procedures that you are proposing. Alright, so let's move on to have a quick look of the answer here. Alright, for question number 4. So the memo format. Alright, memo format, and because you are writing an email to your partner, so you need to give background information. This is just purely copy or paste facts, and I can tell you here is way too much case facts. If you are actually answering the examination, half or maybe 1/3 of this information is already enough. You need to establish the memo format and then a brief introduction of the problem. See the subject here. Okay, you need to learn that before you go to examination. This is like 2 to 4 marks if you got a memo question. If you're doing it good enough, you will get like 2 or 3 marks already for this question. All right, so practice this yourself. Let's dig into the answer. You see, this is the first one, the first requirement regarding the 12 manual journal entry. You see, each entries here, each answer here. Okay, I'm just looking at the first 5, all right, because the question is looking for only 5 entries. We are going to look at the 5 easiest marks you should be able to get. They are all focusing on what's being mentioned in this question, the 12 manual entries. I don't think you can copy the procedures directly from another past paper question if you encounter this in the exam. It's talking about very specific things. You have to tailor-make your audit procedures to get marks. And first part, as I mentioned just now, it is an established process, something you already know. So you can think of to check the correctness and whether there are any mistakes during the process of this. You see, 2 of this answer here is talking about test of control, understanding the process. Where any established internal control, you can check any appropriate approval has been done by the appropriate approver in this company. You see, test of control. You can get like 2 marks if you like describe it properly. What you need to understand. You see, we haven't even started to check the accuracy or the calculation of the problem yet. We first get as much information as you can from the client first. This is audit procedures, inquiry, right? And then this time there are 12 manual entries. They require some kinds of calculation. It is to like the 90% and 10% problem. See, 90% and 10%. So because you need to $100, you need to calculate 90% and take it out of 90% and then send it back to the owner of the consignment products. So that involves calculation. Whenever a question involves calculation, no matter how simple it is, remember in this case it's just a 10% commission, so the calculation is extremely simple. But it doesn't matter. Remember, not just difficult calculation you need to calculate, even simplest calculation, just simply casting. Okay, 1 + 1 = 2. You need to check as an auditor. So the checking the calculation already get you another marks. Regarding all the 12 manual entries, just check the calculation and ensure the amounts are being posted correctly. I believe this is a typo. So correct amounts are posted to the ledger. And then you see, we perform a reasonableness test because it's talking about percentage. So we check that whether entry 2 equal to 10% and entry 2, when we perform the calculation, it is like 10% on the of the consignment sale. You see, both of this, no matter you're talking about the 90% or the 10%, you can say this is a reasonableness test. And you see, your examiner is demonstrating to you how you change the procedures a little bit and you can still obtain 2 marks. Both of this is just reperforming the calculation. Reasonableness test is kind of another way to reperform the calculation. But using reasonable test, this word is one audit procedure. It's an analytical procedure. Reperforming the calculation, recalculating is another description of the audit procedures. And you see, just picking the 90% and 10% for recalculation and reasonableness test, you got 2 marks already here for 2 valid audit procedure. And this is all you need in the examination. 5 valid audit procedure. That is it. Alright? And you of course you can spend some time to look at the remaining audit procedures, but this is the simplest and easiest marks you can get for the first part here. 5 marks. Alright? And you can take a look at this. This is not something I will recommend because there are not some direct audit procedure you can think about. I always ask you to pick the easiest mark first. And then for second part here, because we don't have enough information, it is hard for us to propose the checking or the audit procedures regarding the correctness, the accuracy, whatever about the manual journal entries. So our information is not enough. Therefore, the audit procedures will be focusing on getting more information. You see, you just have to obtain the listing of the 50 journal entries and analyze the details of it, and then check this listing regarding the amounts of the debit. Where does it go? The debit, where does it go? It credit revenue. Where does the debit go? So basically, the first two is just asking for information regarding the journal entries. This is what kind of evidence, the sufficient audit evidence that you require to further perform your other procedures or continue with your audit. So you get the information, and then you continue to ask the client question. What are the nature of these entries? What is the approval requirements, the approval process? What is the process of posting other manual journal entries? Is it the same process as the 12 manual journal entries in part 1 of this question? Ask question. You can establish your audit procedures in whatever way you want. You can say whatever things you want to say, as long as you are asking the right question, inquiring about the nature, the approval, the who is approving it, who is preparing the entries for approval, who will review it, who will check it. You can ask whatever question you want, as long as it is to obtain valid and appropriate information from the client. And then you can see we focus on the approval requirement. Again, approval requirement for these manual entries, and ultimately you check whether these entries have been booked in the ledger and agreed to a financial statement. This is a very general audit procedures which I don't recommend, but if you describe it properly, you will still score you the marks. But you see here, the question only asks you for 5, right? Or at least 5. If you give 4, if you can answer this 50 strange manual journal entry, if you identify the problem and being able to write out at least 3 to 4 relevant audit procedures, you already got more than 67% of the marks, right? 5 here, let's say you get 3 or 4 right, and get 2 to 3 right here, you already get like 6 to 7 marks. And if you do the memo properly, let's not assume you got or 2 marks or to 4 marks of the memo marks. At least let's say you got 2 marks regarding the memo format. Let's say you got 2 marks and you already got like 6-7 marks here for both part of this question. You got already like 8 to 10 marks in this 12 marks question. It's more than enough for you to pass. All you have to do is really to read the question carefully. A lot of information are being given in the case question. Why? Think about it. This is inside the question. Why your examiner give you so many details? Why don't they put this inside the case? Why they need to put it as additional information in the question? It is because your examiner feels that you do not have enough information to answer this question here. So your examiner provides you with much more information so that you can use them to think about the problem. We auditors need our client to provide us information. We need to ask questions for us to successfully perform our audit and our audit procedure. This is a simulation of the real world audit. So in this question, look for all the information. Your client is here because you cannot physically ask a client in examination, and your client is already inside the question. Your examiner is creating the question to act like your client is speaking to you. The problem is whether you can identify what your client, i.e. your examiner, is trying to tell you through the text and wordings in this question. Why I have to tell you this is a demonstration here? Because I want you to know this is an established process. I want you to think about the test of control in your answer, because I'm asking you to propose audit procedures and your rationale in the memo. Why are you providing while you're asking the information. All right, so this is question number 4. Now go revisit the whole case and the whole question again, and then try to write out your own answer. Even if you already read the answer, you can try doing it again, because I want you to do more practice in like really plan and write out the audit procedure and the answer in order for you to be able to perfect your skills and to get the required marks in the examination. All right, so this is it for question number 4.